Good afternoon, everybody. This is Chris Ogle, and this is the first of a election special series of shows that we're putting on. We're hoping to have all of the local Watford and maybe even some of the other constituents around on these shows, so that we can get to know about who they are, we can engage with them, and we can hear a little bit about their views on things, which I think is going to be really powerful. Today, I've got Nick Lincoln, United Kingdom Independence Party. Come and say hello, Nick.
Hello, Chris, and thanks for inviting me on.
You're welcome. Well, I've actually been doing quite a bit of work out there in a prelude to this, finding out what people would like to ask you. So I've got some fairly comprehensive questions here, which we will go through in due course. But I mean, Watford as a constituency, I've lived in Watford all my life, and we'll come on to a little bit about yourself in a bit. But Watford, historically, whatever seems to have happened in Watford is one of these kind of important swing towns, not in a horrible way, but swing towns is that whatever seems to happen in Watford seems to be the way the general election goes. And this year is particularly interesting because in the previous we had Claire Ward, who was Labour. We've now got Richard Harrington, who's Conservative. We've got Dorothy Thornhill, obviously, who's been 3 or 4 times elected now. I can't remember how many times, but she's been around forever, and she's now standing as the MP for the Lib Dems. And we've got UKIP, of course, bounced on the scene with Nigel Farage and your good self representing them here in Watford. So it's a really exciting battle here in Watford, and one I'm looking forward to. So, I mean, do you see it the same?
Absolutely, and as you said, since 1974, Chris, whichever party has won in Watford has won the nation. Right. So it couldn't be a more classic marginal swing seat. You know, if the scriptwriters for Yes Minister had drawn it up, it would have seemed far-fetched, but it really is that much an important marginal, which means that every party involved has got something to play for. Our neighbouring constituencies, I mean, Hertsmere is very, very true blue. You know, in Hertsmere you could probably pin a blue rosette onto a donkey and it's going to win. So it's not particularly interesting for the other parties, it's not particularly interesting for the electorate, it's not interesting for the media, but Watford is, and Watford will get all the big guns coming down. So we're about to see David Cameron come down, Ed Miliband come down, Nick Clegg come down, because if you win these kind of seats, you tend to win the elections. And the big parties, they don't care. They don't care about their safe seats. Labour don't care about the northeast of England. They know they're going to win there. The Tories don't really care about the southeast. They know they're going to win in the home counties. But the marginal seats, they really do care about, because they're the ones, if you win those, you win the election. So it's going to be interesting, and I'm totally honoured to be part of the democratic process.
Fantastic stuff. Now, I don't know a huge amount about you, Nick, and I'm sure that people watching
that's probably a good thing.
in Watford don't either. So, can you just give us a potted history of Nick Lincoln, sort of where you went to school? Was it local?
Sure. Okay. Well, I was a child of the 60s, so I was born in 1969, January 69. So I guess it was just before man set foot on the moon, or set foot on a studio in Hollywood, depending on your conspiracy theories. And I moved here. I was born in Sussex, but my family moved to Abbotts Langley in 1976 when I was 7. And I've lived in Watford since 1985, in more central Watford initially, and since 2000 I lived in Garston. And so I'm a local boy. I've effectively grown up here. I think this is a fantastic town. We're on the cusp of London, and yet 5 minutes the other way, we've got the beautiful Hertfordshire countryside. It's a great economy in the area. The schools are fantastic. I personally went to King's Langley School at the top of the hill by the Common there in 1980. Stayed on to do A-levels just because it meant I wouldn't have to work. So I didn't put any effort into my A-levels, but it meant I didn't have to go looking for a job. Got 2 rubbish A-levels. Joined NatWest Bank in the late 80s, and you might remember, Chris, but in the 1980s, if you could barely read or write, the banks would employ you. They were booming, opening lots of new branches. So I worked for NatWest at Watford Junction branch, you know, the one with the drive-through by the train station. Oh, then yeah. Worked in the city, and typical Nick Lincoln fashion, I had a gap year sort of late in life. So when I was 24 or 25, I just left work. I wasn't enjoying it. Travelled for a year. Brilliant. Best thing I did, I think, in terms of broadening my mind. Came back, did a university degree at Wolverhampton University, one of the old-style polys that they upgraded to university. I I did a totally useless humanities degree, American Studies with politics, and I only did it because I was going through the UKIP book, A to Z, and I got as far as American Studies and thought that looks interesting. Did that, graduated in 1997, kind of just stumbled into the world of financial services, as a lot of people do. So I worked for a company called Allied Dunbar, which is now called Zurich. I worked on the Croxley Business Park at the other end of Watford. And so I've been in financial services now for, yeah, crikey, it's frightening actually, over 20 years. And in 2008, I set up my own firm. So I'm an independent financial advisor. I'm based in Radlett, which is a very nice place to work. I've got the easiest commute in the world. It's about 6 minutes in the car if I leave just after the rush hour. I'm my own boss. I think I'm unemployable because I don't take instruction particularly well, and I love it. And that's my background in terms of the person you see in front of you and how I got to where I am.
Fantastic, thanks for that, Nick. So, what's the road to politics then? I mean, how have you managed to find yourself in this position that you are now? Because obviously UKIP's not been around for that long, so you must have been allied to some party prior to this. But obviously you've got a keen interest in politics, and so there's a route to where you are now. Can you just go through that with us?
Yes, it was a kind of a Damascene conversion, really. I've never been involved actively in politics. I mean, I've always voted since 1987. That was the earliest year I could vote, and I've voted at every election, local, European, and general, but never actually been involved with a party. And I think that's one of the things about UKIP that, to me, is very refreshing, is that nobody in UKIP is a career politician. We've all got hinterlands. We've all done things outside of politics. I know it's a commonly repeated complaint, but it's a repeated complaint because it's true that the current establishment, they do PPE at university, they become an aide or an intern at Westminster, they get put into a safe seat, they get elected, they go through the party, and all they know is politics. They don't know anything else about life. And I think most of them couldn't run a bath, let alone run a business. Whereas UKIP, the people have some background. You know, they're business owners. So it gives them a bit of context on life. I've always voted for one particular party since 1987. And I voted for that party in 2010 only because their campaign was so inept. I thought Gordon Brown might get back in, and I didn't want that on my conscience. And I've been thoroughly disappointed by Cameron since 2010, and I came to the realisation about 3 years ago, Chris, that I hadn't left the Tories have left me. Everything they once stood for, they no longer do. I started looking at UKIP. I didn't know them from Adam. I remember seeing Nigel Farage on TV a few times, because back then, even 3 years ago, we didn't get much airtime compared to what we have now. I saw Nigel Farage. I looked a bit deeper into UKIP, and I thought, you know what? These policies resonate with me across the board. It's not just the European Union and getting out of that awful organisation. There's a whole lot more to it, and I thought, you know, they are just ringing the bell on all these issues that the other three failed parties no longer address. They don't put the interests of the British people first, and common sense seems to have evaporated from Westminster, and UKIP is just common sense, and that's how I got to where I am. So I became branch chairman in Watford about 3 years ago. Did that for a couple of years, stepped down last year because to be the PPC and the branch chairman, it's just too much work, and I think you need separate roles. And had a hustings event, as you do, and somehow got selected by the branch, and here I am today. But this is all new to me. You know, it's exciting, it's challenging, but it's all new. I love it.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. I mean, one of the things when I've sort of discovered from asking people about politics, and specifically about Watford, because this is really about Watford, although we will touch a bit later on some of the national things which people have asked me about to raise with you today. But there are some things going on in Watford. Some of the procedures that have been gone through to get things done, I don't think have been, perhaps, personally, I don't think have perhaps been done in the right way, i.e. it's almost been a fait accompli pushed on people to achieve certain ambitions. But there's quite a few things in Watford. So what is it about, what are the things in Watford that you would be kind of addressing or looking at should you be elected come May?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the initial thing to say is that our national policies will have an impact across the country, obviously, but they will also have an impact on Watford. And there are about 5 areas where I think our national policies will have an explicit positive impact on Watford. One of the things I would address and would lobby for is to get this health campus fiasco sorted out once and for all. Are we going to have a new hospital? Are we going to have money spent on a new hospital? It's been going back and forth for years now, it seems. Dorothy Thornhill seems to have made it a point of principle that she will build on the allotments regardless of the reason given. Initially it was because we needed new homes, and actually before that we were told we could save the allotments, they weren't needed. Then it was changed that we did need the land to make it viable, and we're going to build 700 dwellings in Vicarage Ward, one of the densest wards in the county in terms of population, and now they're saying no, we need the land for a school. I mean, she chops and changes her script, but she seems to have it out for the allotment holders. We pay £55 million a day to belong to the European Union. If we come out of the European Union, when we come out of the European Union, £55 million a day will build an awful lot of quality hospitals around the country, and we say let's divert some of that money and get this sorted. Watford deserves a fully functioning, capable, modern 21st century hospital. I'm committed to lobbying for that and getting this thing sorted. Other areas, and it does tie in again with the fact that the three main parties don't want to talk about the elephant in the room. Housing in Watford, yes, there is an acute shortage of housing in Watford, but Chris, Watford's been a building site for the last 15 years. From Croxley Green through to Garston and Leavesden, high density housing estates everywhere, and yet we've still got this housing crisis. Well, why is that? The answer is we have an unprecedented demand for housing. Why is that? We have open borders with Europe. Our population in 2013, the country's population went up by a net 200,000. That's the population equivalent of Portsmouth. That is why we have an acute housing shortage. So yes, we do need to address it in the short term, but let's have an honest conversation with the electorate. Let's ask these three parties, how responsible are you for it? Well, I can tell you they all are, because the Lib Dems, Labour and the Tories are all pro-EU. They are pro-open borders. That is why we have a housing crisis in Watford, and I read today that Watford Borough Council has plans to build a further 6,500 homes in Watford, of which 1,500 are going to be around Watford Junction, which is already a congestion nightmare. So our policy of leaving the EU, having sensible migration, will alleviate the housing demand, and if we know how many people are coming into the country, we can plan for it. Currently, we only find out after the event, so the house builders haven't got any chance of catching up with it, and if we had 200,000 people coming here every year, we are never, ever going to get rid of this housing shortage until the country is plastered in concrete. So we say no to that. It's acute in Watford. And feeding off that as well is the schooling in Watford. We're very fortunate here, Chris. We have some fantastic schools. The two grammar schools, Parmeters, Queen's, some other good schools in St Albans, and that creates a demand because people move here for the schooling alone. But the fact remains, we've got far too many people chasing far too few schools. The secondary school application system was changed a few years ago. In my day, I think you could put down 3 schools for your child's choice, and now it goes to 4. And I know people in the last 2 years who have put down 4 choices and haven't got any of those 4 choices. Now, nobody expects that everybody's going to get their top choice or even their top 2 choices, but there is something fundamentally wrong with the system where parents aren't getting any of their school choices, even though that list is now up to 4. It's either 2 things: we haven't got enough schools, or we've got too much demand for schools. I think we need to build more schools, but we need to cap the demand, and we need to control migration into the country. Commercially, Watford is the hub of Hertfordshire. It's been a commercial town since the Roman times. It's got fantastic transport links. You and I know the M1's on our doorstep, the M25, a great train service. Well, we'll come on to the train service. A quick train service into Euston, a tube line, Luton Airport, Heathrow Airport. It's fantastic. It will always be a good place to have a business, but only UKIP support small business. The other parties cozy up to these big multinationals. They scratch each other's backs. The Labour Party and the Tory Party especially, they engage in this crony capitalism, corporatism. Only UKIP says, hold on, the small business is the backbone of this country. So our policies of leaving the European Union, massively reducing the regulation that bombards small businesses, because the EU wants to regulate everything. Large companies can handle it. They've got the in-house HR teams. They've got the in-house lawyers to deal with this regulation. Small businesses haven't. We want to reduce taxation to help small businesses, and we've got to simplify our tax regime, which throttles small businesses in various reliefs and rules and regulations, so that our tax guide now is the biggest tax guide in the world. It exploded under Gordon Brown with numerous rules and breaks and reliefs and what have you. Let's simplify it. Let's get small businesses back on their feet, encourage them, because you don't get a big business until you have a small business, because the small business might just grow into the big business. And if we don't encourage the small business sector, then that is extremely bad news for our economy. And the fifth thing that is Watford specific, this town is a fantastic commuter hub for London. I would imagine that within the M25, it's maybe the #1 supplier of workers into London every morning and then bringing them out every day through Watford Junction, and what is a very good service when it works well. I don't think necessarily all the Watford commuters yet realise what HS2 is going to do. I think the perception is, well, HS2 is a problem for the people in the leafy Chilterns and it won't affect us in Watford. Well, it absolutely will. The Euston redevelopment, they've got to reconfigure and install new platforms to accommodate HS2. That redevelopment will take at least 10 years according to official estimates. I've heard unofficially it'll take about 15 years. What that means is during the Euston redevelopment caused by HS2, there will be, at times, reduced services from Watford Junction into Euston. That will have a massively detrimental effect on our commuters. There's even talk that at some stage it may be a coach service from Watford Junction into Euston. Now, if you ever caught a rush hour train in the morning into Euston, Chris, and I'm sure you have, can you imagine all those thousands of people getting on coaches to go to work and back over a period of time? Absolute chaos. And of course HS2 doesn't even benefit Watford. The service doesn't come through here. It goes off through the Chilterns to Birmingham. If it alleviates any pressure on our line, it will be absolutely minimal, yet we are going to be exposed to the downside of it. It's going to cost about £46 billion. Let's be kind and assume they only get that wrong by half and it's actually £90 billion. Our view is scrap HS2. We're the only party that's committed to saying no to HS2, and what about spending some of the money we would have spent on it on our existing rail structure, especially our services into London, i.e. Watford Junction to Euston. Let's invest in the existing infrastructure, and we say no to HS2. It is not good news for Watford.
We covered an awful lot of things there.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, one of the...
Take your pick.
I mean, I don't want this to be like I know you put Paxman. It's not going to be one of these put people really on the spot and embarrass people. But there's a lot of ways of looking at the information that you passed across there. And one of the things, I mean, I've lived in Watford all my life. Yes, I think actually quite a bit of the housing issue is also could be attributed to the way people actually choose to live these days. There's a lot more people living alone who are, we're used to living families, 4 or 5 people in one dwelling. There's a lot more people now living in 1s and 2s, and the requirements on things like flats and stuff is massive compared to what it would have been, a few decades ago. So I think the mix of housing and the different types of dwellings that we need these days is also a factor that's exacerbating the problem, really. And Watford is a desirable place to live, and there are a lot of immigrants in Watford, but we've always had immigrants. We had in the old days the Spanish, I think, came, and we had quite a few from when India, from India and that neck of the woods. So we've always had quite a population migration to Watford. And I was looking at some statistics the other about actual population size in the UK, and it's Watford might be a bit above the line, but the average increase per annum of over the last, I think, 50 years, it's been something like we've gone from, I don't know, somewhere in the region of 50-odd million to 75 million over 50 years. It's been, and it's not been massively huge just lately in comparison to what it has been in the past. So Watford might be a particular issue in that there are more people wanting to come to Watford because of the proximity to London, and of course we've got everything going for us here in Watford. Like you say, we're a couple of minutes away from being in beautiful countryside, and 20 minutes from being in the middle of London, which is, I always say to people, if they moan about Watford, you have no idea how good Watford is.
No, I take on board your points there. I would say that actually the population has risen quite markedly in the last 10 years, and a population increase of £200,000. I mean, I'm a financial advisor, so I can do the maths. 5 years of that, that's 1 million extra people in the population. Yes, people are living differently, and I totally accept that people are living alone, perhaps more than they ever have done. But we can't take an increase of net population increase of £200,000. Most of those people do come, and they come into London and the southeast. It is having a knock-on effect, and the fact is that part of the quality of life in Watford is that there are green spaces and there are allotments in these denser parts of town. You know, the vicarage area is extremely well built up, busy with traffic. That allotment there, that's like a little treasure trove for the people that live in that area. We've got to start protecting. If we're building on that, we might as well just give up, because our town will become one homogenous commuter strip through to Hemel Hempstead, which to a degree it has been. So maybe in Watford there are reasons as well as immigration, but then how does that explain all the building along the Grand Union Canal from here through to Hemel Hempstead? You know, Nash Mills, Kings Langley, what used to be the Ovaltine factory, Apsley, mass high density estates everywhere you look, and it is a problem. And to pretend that it's not caused by a population that's rising at £200,000 a year, 200,000 people a year, sorry, as it did in 2013, I think the three parties are disingenuous. They don't want to talk about it because they've got their hands all over that.
Well, I definitely agree with you that it's something that needs to be discussed, and you know, the reason for these kinds of shows that we're doing now and using technology is that, you know, we can actually widen the debate and get more people engaged in talking about these things, because that's what's absolutely needed, and which, you know, the apathy in politics is because actually people just turn around and say, well, it doesn't matter what I think, they're going to do what they want to do anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's terrible, and I know there's some talk that you know, in Australia it's compulsory to vote. If you don't vote, that's a criminal offence, and I think that's looking at it from the wrong way. It's looking through the telescope from the wrong end. I think people don't vote because they're disenfranchised. They don't think it makes a difference. Well, let's give people a reason to vote. Let's not force them to vote. That's not going to solve anything. You're still going to have the same crummy politicians if they're forced to vote. In fact, they'll probably be crummier. So let's give people a reason to vote. And I think why UKIP are so appealing is that we are an alternative voice. The three other parties really are one homogenous whole. On all the key issues, they have the same view. So they're pro-European Union, they're pro-giving away foreign aid, £12 billion worth of foreign aid, even though we're up to and above our neck in debt. They're pro the PC culture. There's very little to separate them. UKIP say, actually, we've got an alternative way of looking at how things could be better in this country, and I think people are really grasping onto that, and it helps us that the other three parties are just so interchangeable. There's nothing really to separate them.
I've heard that the Watford Junction, coming on to the railway situation, Watford Junction is going to be redeveloped once more. I think it's the fourth iteration of trying to sort out that bit in front of the station. I've no idea what the story is with that, but you know, like we're going to go through another redevelopment of the station. They're going to obviously take down that building that's there and possibly turn it into mixed units of housing and commercial. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the plans, but yeah, that coupled with HS2, and I don't know the timescales for HS2, but it's a lot more hassle, isn't it, for the commuter?
Yes, it will be, and if that muted redevelopment of Watford Junction goes on along anything like those lines, that'll be you know, on top of the HS2 thing, perhaps at this time at the same time, will be an absolute pain. And I can't stress enough, this town is a lot of its wealth and a lot of the prestige that Watford has is because of its links with London, being so close to London and offering people here the chance to go and work in London and be at work within half an hour or so. And we don't want to be putting that at risk at all. And I think certainly with HS2, I think we really will be doing that, and I think people of Watford just need to be aware of the carnage that HS2 will mean to the daily commute into and out from their place of work.
What's your view on the other controversial rail thing, the closure of the Watford Met and the extension of the Met line into Watford Junction? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I've got a vested interest here, so I'll declare this straight away. I go to Lords once a year for the cricket, and I would prefer the tube line to run from Watford Junction solely for that reason, because I can get the Abbey flyer into the Watford Junction and get on the Met line to St John's Wood without having to go to the Met station. On a serious note, I know what I think it's a nice thing to have. It's a nice project to have. but crikey, we're in so much debt. Has there really been a massive demand for a tube line from Watford Junction? You know, you're closing a historical tube station that services that part of Watford very well. Going forward, the only route into London will be via Watford Junction, whether you go overland or you go underground, which means the more cars going there, more cars having to deal with that crazy one-way system that we've got currently. I'm a bit ambivalent about it. I think it'll look very nice when it's there. I don't see a massive demand for it, and I think for the people of Watford around the Met Station, you know, a lot of housing there. They built a brand new estate there, didn't they, a good few years ago, right by Watford Met. You know, a commuter estate, 1-bed, 2-bed flats. And now, down the line, they're going to close that station. You know, more joined-up thinking, more total absence of common sense. So I think it's a nice thing to have. If we weren't in so much debt, I'd probably think, let's have a look at it and let's do it. But, you know, haven't we got better things to spend our money on, like perhaps a new hospital?
Well, I mean, coming on to that, I mean, we've got some, there are some key issues from a national perspective that people have mentioned that I should raise here, and one of them is obviously the NHS. And over the weekend, there was all sorts of stories about privatisation, going to be insurance scheme led, but free at the point of use. What's happening there? I mean, there's conflicting stories about whether UKIP is for the NHS or against it, or whether it's telling the truth to the electorate. I mean, where do you see that?
Yeah, again, that's one of the big questions. And already, you know, the election campaign has started off with the Tories and Labour being very, very cynical about the NHS and using it almost like a tool to back and forth between them. And it's become our NHS, hasn't it, over the last year or so, as Labour try and claim it as somehow theirs. And it is a very emotive subject. I do understand that. But I think we've got to a pretty poor stage in this country's political debate where we can't even discuss the NHS and possibly reforming it without it being seen as a sacrilegious statement. Our view on the NHS is it will remain free at the point of need for the British people, it will be paid from general taxation, and there will be no privatisation of the NHS. What we have said is we will spend £3 billion on frontline services, i.e. the people that deal with the patients. At the moment, over half of the NHS staff are non-clinical. They are management. They are pushing bits of paper around. They are not treating patients, and that is insane. We want to increase the number of nurses, doctors, and we will keep it free at the point of need as it is now. We will not charge you to see your GP or what have you. That was a Labour idea raised by peers, flagged by them, nothing to do with us. It is basically, I'll be kind and say what the Labour Party especially are saying is very, very disingenuous. We would like the NHS, but it needs more frontline staff. It needs a lot less middle management. Most successful organisations are pyramid-based, Chris. I mean, you'll know this from your business background. So at the top, there will be a layer of the top management, then another layer, and at the bottom are the people that interact with the customers, and they should be the most. The NHS seems diverted, and you've got the people that actually help and save lives and look after people are right at the bottom, the pin, the sharp end of the triangle, and the management wedge seems to be massive above it, and that's wrong. And we think that does need reforming and changing, and we're not going to shy away from it. But we're not going to privatise it. Labour did that with the PFI initiative. They gave £50 billion worth of contracts, cleaning especially, to hedge funds and private equity firms. And of course, Gordon Brown negotiated the terms with his best Wonga head on, so that £50 billion is going to cost £300 billion to repay, which is why so many health trusts are cash strapped. And even today, Liz Kendall, the Labour shadow health spokesperson, said we should consider privatising parts of the NHS if that is a decent outcome. So they talk about it all the time. We don't, and we are opposed to it.
I mean, just as a side, the hospital at Watford, I mean, under very difficult conditions, they've won some awards, national awards, which has been fantastic. So, yeah, they're doing sterling work in Watford at the hospital there. As you say, under what are difficult conditions, with an ageing hospital building, of course, which has been going on forever. So, difficult one. Another question, moving on, is TTIP. I've been keeping my ears close to the ground on this one. There's some major concerns out there about TTIP from people who know what it is, and the very undemocratic nature of how this how this arrangement has been sort of negotiated is leaving people quite worried, actually. So where do you sit on that?
Yeah, TTIP is a European Union driven idea, and so as with all EU things, it is remarkably difficult to actually read it and get any sense out of it. What I do know is that, so I don't know the ins and outs of TTIP. I do know that it's a way of seemingly giving American corporations the right to turn us over without any reference to democracy or parliamentary accountability. I can tell you categorically that UKIP are totally and 100% opposed to TTIP without any equivocation or reservations, and that's our stance on it.
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that someone mentioned to me today. One is that the Americans bleach their chickens, for example, and we don't do that over here, but it opens the gateway to food that's subject to those kinds of treatments being available in the UK, and we definitely don't want that. And 70% of the processed foods in stores in the US have got some GMO component in them, which of course is not the case over here. And these kinds of trade arrangements means that we can obviously we could be open to all sorts of weird and wonderful products which are currently not allowed in the EU under the legislation that we're currently trading under. So a lot of concern there, especially when all of these discussions are going on behind closed doors and they're secret, and actually there's no democratic component to it. So whatever they agree, and we have to live by it.
No, I mean it's the European Union in microcosm, Chris. I mean, they don't like democracy, and certainly they don't care about our sovereign parliament passing laws that we are bound by. They just run roughshod over that. And as you said, TTIP appears to be a way around all of the laws that we have in this country that are on statute. So opposed to it, again, EU, complete lack of transparency, lack of accountability, and in Westminster, a lack of a political class with any backbone to stand up to them and say, no, we're not having this.
Yeah, definitely. Here's the last question for you, Nick. I did mention I'm going to have one question at the end. Somebody said to me today, if we could change the system, if the system that we had, if we could start with a white sheet of paper and we could create something that we felt was much better for the people of this country, what's your vision of how that might look like? What would you change in the way that the system is constructed that might end up with a fairer, more equitable society, say?
Thanks for that, Chris. That's a real killer, isn't it? I suppose the first thing I would want to do is you have to get people to respect your politicians and the system. They have to feel that those politicians are answerable to them, and that the politicians are in charge of the law of the land. And because we've ceded away our sovereignty since 1975 without a fight, I think that's led to Westminster falling into disrepute, its reputation. People see it as just an empty vassal now. It has no real power. So obviously leaving the EU, I'd bring that back. If we could start from scratch again, I think more localism. You know, we've got a very centralised form of government at the moment. There's very little true local democracy. It would be nice if we had a system where that was cascaded back to the counties and back to towns, where local people get far more say in local matters, rather than, again, this top-down approach that doesn't really work, the central planning idea. I think that would just be a very good thing. And it is UKIP policy to have local referenda on local key issues, to bring back some form of local democracy. I know that you're, in your professional life, you're about community and embracing people again, and helping out people and talking to your neighbour and just getting things done and getting things involved at a local level. And I think if we could do that in democracy, it would be very, very helpful. It's a bit of a wishy-washy answer. It's a very good question. I'm sure there are zillions of things that everyone's got their own idea. Some people might think we need to have one master ruler who should rule us all and we shouldn't have democracy. Other people will go completely the other way and we should have democracy, but at the local level. And I think we just need to remember that government is never the solution. Government is always the problem. The less government we have in our lives, generally the better. If we're going to have government in an ideal world, I would have local government answerable to local people.
Fantastic. No, I mean, as you say, I mean, my personal view is local, and devolved responsibility, and yeah, it's just interesting. I guess there's a gazillion answers to that question, but it's but thanks very much for sharing what your view of it. I think that's
Well, I know one of them would be free beer. I think that would solve a lot of the world's problems.
no.
So that's
Right. Okay. Okay, Nick. I think that's it. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground. You've had a chance really to just explain who you are, a little bit about you and the way you think. I think it's been really, really useful. I certainly learned something, and I kind of understand where you are now, which I think was the purpose of what we set out to do here. So so thanks ever so much for joining me. And unless you've got anything to say, last few words.
I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity. This is really exciting. I think it's a brilliant use of technology, Chris. And if we can get people engaged in democracy through using technology like this, I'm all for it. I have got a website. If I'm allowed to reference it, I will do. If you don't want me to, tell me so.
Please do.
Okay, so my website for my campaign for Watford is very simple. It's nick4watford.uk. Nick number 4 watford.uk. So when I'm doing things, I put blogs on there and just my thoughts on recent events in Watford if people want to keep track of what I'm doing. But again, thank you for letting me come on here, and thank you to the people that are listening to us.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Nick, and I'll catch you on the campaign trail.
Absolutely, I'll be out there. I'm getting through the leather, getting through the shoes.
Okay, take care now.
Bye.
Bye.